The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It came in waves, sometimes soft, whispering against the windshield, and sometimes hammering down hard enough to make the wipers squeal in protest. Claire Morton drove slowly along the coastal highway, the ocean's roar somewhere beyond the foggy darkness to her right. The road curved like a ribbon through the cliffs, slick with rain and glistening under her headlights. It was past midnight and she was the only car for miles. Her phone had lost service an hour ago. The GPS map froze, her location marker pulsing like a dying heartbeat. The letter on the passenger seat, creased, water-stained, was the only reason she was here. Dear Ms. Morton, we regret to inform you that the property registered to your late father, Jonathan Morton, will be demolished by the end of the month. You may collect any remaining personal belongings before that time. It had been 15 years since her father's death. 15 years since she'd last seen the lighthouse at Gray Harbor Point. A tower of stone and iron standing above the sea, like a sentinel watching something only it could see. The locals used to call it the Warden's Light. Her father had called it home. She slowed as the first flicker of town lights appeared through the fog. A sign leaned crooked by the road. Welcome to Gray Harbor, founded 1879. Population 4 and 12. The paint had peeled away, and someone had scratched through the population count, replacing it with the word less. Claire exhaled. Nice to be back, she muttered to herself. The town was almost silent. Shuttered stores, dark windows, and wet streets glistening like black glass. The faint smell of salt and diesel hung in the air. She parked near the docks where a single streetlight buzzed weakly. Beyond the pier, she could just make out the faint silhouette of the lighthouse. Tall, skeletal, its top shrouded in fog. The beam, once the brightest on the coast, had long gone dark. Or so she thought. For just a second, as the fog thinned, she saw a faint glow. A pulse of light sweeping across the waves. Then it was gone. She blinked, unsure if she'd imagined it. The harbor office was a weathered wooden building at the edge of the docks. A single light glowed inside. She knocked. After a moment, a man in a yellow raincoat opened the door. His beard was gray, his face carved with the deep lines of a man who had spent too many years in salt wind. "You're Jonathan's girl," he said, not asking but knowing. "Yes." "Claire." He nodded slowly. "Thought you'd come sooner or later." He reached behind the desk, pulled out a rusted key tied to a leather strap, and handed it to her. "The old place is still standing," he said. "But be careful up there. Things don't stay quiet at the point anymore." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward the fogged window. "Sometimes the light still comes on at night," he said softly. "Even though the power's been cut for years." Before she could respond, he shut the door. The road to the lighthouse wound through a narrow forest path. The trees leaned over the road, their branches dripping. As she reached the cliffs, the wind grew stronger, the kind that carried the smell of brine and old secrets. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its walls streaked with rust and moss. The waves crashed far below, exploding against the rocks in bursts of white foam. Claire parked beside the iron gate. The padlock was old but open. The hinges screamed as she pushed the gate aside. The lighthouse door was made of heavy metal, paint peeling like old skin. She pressed the key in. It turned with a low, grinding click. The door opened inward with a long, breathy sigh. Inside, the air was cold and thick with salt. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching glints of glass, twisted metal, and a set of spiral stairs winding upward. Seaweed clung to the walls in long strips, like something had tried to crawl out of the ocean and stopped halfway. Every step she took echoed. The sound bounced off the walls, overlapping with the soft drip of water somewhere far above. Halfway up, she found the living quarters, a small round room with a cot, a stove, and shelves filled with old books swollen from moisture. She brushed her fingers along the wall, tracing faint indentations. Words carved into the stone. Keep the light turning. Her flashlight trembled. On the desk sat an old logbook, the pages warped and yellow. She flipped through it, the ink blurred by years of damp air. Most entries were simple: weather conditions, wind direction, ship sightings. But the last few were strange. June 12th. The fog hasn't lifted in 3 days. Heard the bell from the sea, though there's no ship out there. June 13th. Voices last night. Thought it was the crew at first, but the light was off. The voices were calling from below. June 14th. She came to the door. Claire's breath hitched. The entry was dated the same day her father died. She closed the book and set it aside. The storm outside had grown worse. Rain hammered the glass, and wind howled through the cracks like a distant scream. Then, a sound. Click. It came from above. She turned her flashlight toward the staircase. Another click. Then the faint whine of gears. Slowly, mechanically, the great lamp at the top of the lighthouse began to turn. Her breath came shallow. The power was disconnected. The control switch was rusted solid. Yet the light began to spin. Its first beam cut through the fog, sweeping the sea. And far out in the distance, across the black water, another light flashed back. Claire froze. For a moment she thought it might be a ship. But the flash came again, slower this time, deliberate. 2 flashes. Pause. 1 flash. She didn't know Morse code, but it felt purposeful, like something was answering. Then she noticed something else. The wind had stopped. Completely. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then, a whisper. Claire. The voice was soft, familiar. She spun, the beam of her flashlight shaking. Nobody was there. Her chest tightened. She forced a shaky laugh. You're tired, Claire, that's all. Just tired. But as she turned back toward the window, she saw it. Faint, blurry, reflected in the cracked glass. A man's face, dripping wet, eyes hollow, skin pale as the fog outside. She stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. The beam rolled, spinning across the walls. When she looked again, the reflection was gone. Only the ocean remained, but the lighthouse lamp was still turning, slow and steady, bathing the sea in long sweeping arcs of pale light. And somewhere far out there, the answering light blinked once more. Hours later, the storm had calmed. Claire sat in her car, staring at the lighthouse through the fogged windshield. The light was still on. It shouldn't have been. Her phone, still with no signal, buzzed once. The screen flickered. For a split second, the date glitched, showing June 14th, 2008, the day her father died. Then it went black, and in the reflection of the dark screen, she saw it again. A faint outline behind her shoulder. A man standing in the doorway of the lighthouse, holding a lantern that burned with a blue flame. The sea roared once more, drowning out the sound of her scream. The storm had passed, but the sea hadn't calmed. Even now, in the gray hours before dawn, the waves crashed against the cliffs like something alive, something angry. Claire sat in her car, hands tight around the steering wheel, staring at the lighthouse through the thinning fog. The light still turned, slowly, methodically, each rotation painting the wet rocks in pale gold. She'd watched it all night. It never stopped. Her father's lighthouse, her father's ghost. Finally, she whispered to herself, "You have to go back in." The words barely left her lips before a gust of wind rattled the car. It wasn't like normal wind. It came with a low hum, like distant machinery grinding beneath the sea. Claire exhaled and reached for her flashlight. When she stepped out, the morning air bit through her clothes, cold, sharp, metallic. The world smelled of rust and salt. The path to the lighthouse was slick with rain. Small puddles mirrored the soft light from the tower above. A few gulls circled silent, not calling, just watching. As she pushed open the lighthouse door again, the hinges screamed like something warning her not to enter. Inside, the air had changed. Last night it had smelled of mold and seaweed. Now it carried the faint scent of burning oil. She froze. The lamp was powered by kerosene, but there was no fuel left. Still, somewhere above, she heard the slow churn of gears and the rhythmic hum of the rotating light. She whispered, "How are you running?" Her voice echoed up the spiral staircase, swallowed by the dark. She climbed. Every footstep landed with a hollow clang vibrating through the iron stairs. Halfway up, something caught her eye. An old framed photo hanging crooked on the wall. It showed her father standing by the light, smiling. Beside him stood a woman in a long dress, her face blurred by age and time. Claire frowned. Her mother had never come here. She tilted the frame, trying to read the faded writing on the edge. Gray Harbor Point, 1987, Jonathan and the keeper's wife. The glass cracked under her thumb. For a second, the reflection in it shimmered, like something moved behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind curling through the tower. At the top, the lantern room was blindingly bright. The great glass lens turned smoothly, gleaming like new. Yet when she reached the control panel, her heart skipped. Every switch was rusted off, every wire cut. She touched the lens. It was warm. Then a faint sound broke the silence. Music. Barely audible. Like a gramophone somewhere below, playing an old waltz. She turned off her flashlight. The melody echoed up through the hollow stairwell, slow and haunting. Claire descended, one hand on the cold railing, following the sound. The music grew louder as she reached the living quarters. And then she saw it. A record player spinning in the corner, its needle gliding over a cracked vinyl record. It shouldn't have been possible. The cord was frayed and unplugged, yet it played. The song was one her father used to hum, soft and sad. He called it the Echo Waltz. Her throat tightened. "Dad?" she whispered. The record scratched, and for a moment, the voice that came through the static wasn't singing. It was speaking. "Keep the light turning." The player stopped. Claire's pulse raced. She backed away, bumping into the desk. Papers fell to the floor, scattering across the damp stone. Something moved outside. Through the small window, she saw a figure on the cliffs, tall, standing against the morning fog. Dressed in dark oilskin, holding a lantern that glowed faintly blue, the same lantern from last night. She ran to the door and flung it open. The wind howled. Salt spray hit her face, but the figure was gone. Only footprints remained, leading toward the beach below. The descent path was narrow and overgrown. The tide was pulling out, leaving a wide stretch of wet sand. Claire followed the footprints until they vanished near the water's edge. Something shiny caught her eye. Half buried in the sand was a metal plaque, the kind used on memorial stones. She brushed the sand away. The letters were almost erased by corrosion. In memory of those lost at sea, June 14th, 2008, her father's death date. But beneath it, faintly scratched into the metal, were new words. She is still waiting. A wave crashed, nearly knocking her over. The water surged around her legs, freezing cold, and then she heard it. Voices in the surf, not human voices. Whispers, layered, hundreds of them, calling her name. Claire, come below. She stumbled backward, eyes wide. The sea seemed to shift, rising unnaturally, forming the faint outline of hands, dozens of them, pale, reaching, just beneath the surface. She ran. By the time she reached the lighthouse again, her heart felt like it might burst. Inside, the record player was silent. But the logbook was open on the desk again, on a new page. She hadn't left it open, and the fresh ink, still wet, spelled a single line. The sea remembers, even when you don't. Her hands shook. Who are you? She whispered. The tower groaned. The lantern above flickered once, twice, and stopped turning. Darkness flooded the room, and in that silence she heard a single knock at the metal door. Then another. Then three, slow, deliberate. She didn't move. The third knock echoed longer than it should have, like something was on the other side, pressing its palm against the steel. Finally, she whispered, "Dad?" The door handle turned, just slightly. She bolted up the stairs, flashlight beam darting wildly across the walls. When she reached the lantern room again, the glass was fogged from the inside, like someone had breathed on it. 3 words appeared in the condensation. "Not him, Claire." Her stomach dropped. She backed away from the glass, trembling. And then she saw the reflection. A woman, standing just behind her shoulder, in a soaked white dress, hair tangled, eyes black as the sea. The keeper's wife. The reflection smiled. Claire spun. Nothing there. But the smell of salt and rot filled the room. The kind of scent that didn't come from the sea, but from something long dead beneath it. By evening, she sat on the rocks outside, watching the ocean swallow the sun. The lighthouse no longer glowed. It stood silent, a black silhouette against the blood-red horizon. But as night fell, the sea began to hum again, softly at first. Then louder, and from far beyond the waves, the answering light appeared once more, flashing faintly. Only this time, the pattern was different, not random. Not calling her name, it was spelling something. G-O-B-A-C-K, Claire whispered to herself. I can't. But deep inside, she already knew she would, because the sea wasn't done with her. Not yet. The glass still trembled where the words had appeared. Not him, Claire. The condensation on the inside of the lantern lens slowly faded as the chill wind slipped through the cracks. But Claire couldn't move. Her breath came out in short white bursts that disappeared into the fog rolling through the tower's top. Something shifted in the corner of her eye. The reflection was wrong again. The room behind her, empty, still, didn't match what she saw in the glass. In the reflection, a shadow lingered behind her. Long hair, wet dress, no face. Claire spun around. Nothing. Only the low hum of the wind and the rhythmic groan of the lighthouse turning in the dark. But it wasn't turning. She realized the light had gone still, frozen like time had stopped. She stepped closer to the lens again, her fingers trembling. The words were gone, but something new had formed beneath the glass. A handprint, thin, long, pressed from the inside. Claire stumbled back. Her heel hit the toolbox behind her, sending a wrench clattering across the floor. The sound exploded through the silence like gunfire. The echo didn't fade. It stretched, twisting, until it sounded like breathing. The same sound she'd heard in her father's old recordings, slow, ragged, like someone drowning just below the surface. Claire ran down the spiral stairs. Her flashlight jittered across the walls, flashing over old paintings, ropes, and a cracked mirror. Every reflection seemed delayed. The light moved before her body did. Halfway down, she froze. The air had changed again. It was damp, wet. She looked down and saw water pooling on the steps. At first, it was only a thin layer, glimmering in the beam of her flashlight. Then, as she watched, it rose, silently, steadily, dripping from the walls like the tower itself was bleeding seawater. No. No, 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 she whispered, backing down the steps. Her boot slipped. She caught the rail and turned the light downward. The base of the tower was flooded. Salt water swirled around the furniture, the papers, the logbook, all floating like the aftermath of a wreck. And in the center of the room, the record player spun again, but there was no record on it. The turntable turned on its own, screeching, dragging metal against metal. From beneath the static came a voice, faint, distorted. She drowned here, and he left her. The words gurgled as though spoken underwater. Claire covered her mouth. Dad. He left her. He left me. A wave hit the base of the tower outside. The entire lighthouse shook. The water inside rippled, glowing faintly blue for a second, then went black. Something moved beneath it. The floorboards groaned, and bubbles rose through the water. Claire's light flicked down and caught a shape moving under the surface, a hand. Then another, reaching, grasping. They pressed against the glass floor trapdoor, fingers white and boneless. The latch snapped open with a metallic click. Salt water surged upward, spilling over Claire's boots, splashing her knees. She stumbled back as the trapdoor burst open and a figure emerged, slowly, like a corpse rising from the deep. The woman's dress trailed in tatters, soaked and heavy. Seaweed clung to her shoulders. Her face, pale as the moon, was cracked. Like porcelain left too long in the cold, her eyes were black pools, shifting, endless. The air around her buzzed, the same low-frequency hum that had haunted the tower since Claire arrived. The ghost tilted her head. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere. Walls, floor, water, even Claire's bones. You turned the light off. Claire stepped back, shaking her head. I didn't. It stopped on its own. You let them in. The voice deepened. The floor shuddered. The water behind the ghost churned as though the ocean itself was breathing through it. Shapes moved in the depths, human shapes, twisting, drifting. Claire's mind reeled. Who are you? The ghost smiled, nor what passed for a smile. Her jaw cracked slightly as it opened wider than humanly possible. The widow. The sea kept me when he would not. She raised her hand, and the air turned to ice. The walls of the tower darkened, salt crystallizing in streaks as the water climbed higher. Claire's flashlight flickered and died. In the blackness, only the faint blue glow of the widow's lantern remained. It swayed gently in her hand, the same light Claire had seen from the cliffs. Then, with each flicker, the room changed. Reality stuttered. For a second, Claire wasn't in the tower anymore. She was in a boat. Rain lashed down. The waves hit hard. Her father was there, shouting over the storm. We can't save her, damn it. The line's gone. The woman's scream cut through the wind. A pale hand reached out of the water, and Jonathan turned away. The flash ended. Claire gasped, stumbling back into the flooded tower. The widow was closer now, her face inches away. He left me to die. And now you keep his light. The lantern in her hand flared. A surge of cold tore through Claire's chest, like drowning without water. She fell to her knees, clutching her throat, coughing, seawater spilling from her mouth. She screamed. When she looked up again, the ghost was gone. Only the water remained, calm now, lapping gently against the walls. The record player had stopped spinning, but something new rested on the desk, an old brass key. Claire crawled toward it, coughing, trembling. The tag tied to the key read, "Storage room, basement level." She frowned. There was no basement. The floor creaked beneath her hand. And then, a hollow echo, a space beneath. She stared down at the trapdoor where the widow had risen. It was closed again, but a faint light pulsed through the cracks, like something still breathing below. She picked up the key and whispered, "What did you do down there, Dad?" Outside, thunder rolled again. The wind screamed through the broken window panes, carrying a sound with it. Faint, almost human, laughter. Her father's laughter, and beneath it, the whisper of the widow, cold and clear. "Come down, Claire." The sea remembers. The echo of her father's laugh still trembled through the walls long after the wind died. Claire pressed her palms against the damp stone, trying to tell where the sound had come from. No answer. Only the slow, patient drip of seawater sliding down the stairwell. She looked at the brass key in her hand. The tag, "Storage room, basement level," gleamed in the flicker of her flashlight. But there was no basement. There had never been a basement. She swept the beam across the floor. The trapdoor boards were swollen, warped with salt. Beneath them, the faint pulse of blue light still leaked through the cracks, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. Her father's voice echoed again, farther away this time from below. "Keep the light turning." Claire's throat tightened. "Dad?" Silence. Then the click of metal. The key turned itself once in her palm, just a twitch, enough to make her drop it. It hit the floor with a dull clang. The sound was swallowed instantly, as though the wood beneath it wasn't solid anymore. Claire knelt, breathing hard. She could almost feel the hollow space under her knees, the soft give of rotted boards. She reached for the key, fingers brushing the wet surface, and the floor breathed, a slow inhale. Wood shifting inward. Then a groan deep enough to vibrate through her ribs. She stumbled back. The trapdoor shuddered, and the old iron ring in its center twitched as if being pulled from below. "Fine," she whispered. "You want me down there? Then show me." She jammed the key into the rusted padlock. It turned without resistance. The lock fell open. The door creaked upward an inch, spilling a gust of cold, briny air that smelled like graves and low tide. Darkness waited below. Not black, something deeper. A shade that seemed to drink the light. She raised her flashlight, but the beam died before it reached the bottom. No reflection, no return, just endless descent. Claire hesitated only once more before stepping onto the ladder. Each rung groaned beneath her boots, wet metal slick against her hands. The smell grew stronger, oil, salt, and something sweet and decayed. Halfway down, the walls changed. Stone gave way to iron plating, riveted like a ship's hull. Old machinery lined the sides, gears, levers, gauges fogged with salt. Pipes snaked along the ceiling, dripping black water. She realized what it was. Her father hadn't built a basement. He'd built a chamber, a hidden room, sunk into the rock like the belly of a vessel. At the bottom, her boots splashed into ankle-deep water. The flashlight caught on a metal door at the far end, bolted and sealed. Across its surface, words had been carved by hand. "Do not open when the sea is loud." The sea above was screaming. Claire's breath clouded in the air. Every sound in the chamber seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. The dripping pipes, the faint groan of the lighthouse above, the endless roar of surf filtering through the stone. She aimed her flashlight at the warning again. "Do not open when the sea is loud." "The sea's always loud here," she muttered.
"You made sure of that, didn't you, Dad?"
Her voice fell flat. No echo. The sound died before it could touch the walls. She pressed her palm to the metal door. It was warm. Too warm. like something alive pressed against it from the other side. A low vibration traveled through the floor, gentle at first, then stronger, steady, rhythmic. Not waves, not wind, a heartbeat. She stepped back, flashlight trembling. Somewhere behind her, a valve hissed open on its own. Steam curled up the walls and the pipes began to clatter. The lighthouse was waking up. "Dad, what did you build down here?" A faint thud answered, then another. From behind the door, Claire's throat closed. She aimed the beam at the lock. It was newer than everything else, solid brass, uncorroded. Her father must have replaced it before he died. She remembered him sitting in the kitchen one night, staring out toward the sea. Some things you keep locked, Claire, even from yourself. Now she understood. The water at her feet rippled. A reflection wavered across it. Not hers. A woman's face, half-formed, hair floating around her like ink. "The widow," Claire whispered. "You can't come through here." The reflection smiled. He thought the same. The pipes groaned louder. Steam shot from the seams, burning her arm. She cried out and dropped the flashlight. It hit the water, spun, and stopped, beam pointing straight at the door. Something was leaking from the edges. A thin trickle of dark water, thicker than the rest, sliding like oil down the bolts. It glowed faintly blue. Claire's hand shook as she reached for the lock. She should have turned back. But curiosity, fear, grief, whatever it was, it pushed harder than reason. The key still hung around her neck. She lifted it. The metal door pulsed. A whisper rose from the other side, deep and distant, like someone speaking through the ocean itself. "Claire, please, help me." Her father's voice. She froze. "Dad?" "It's dark down here. The water's coming in. Please, unlock it." The sound wasn't right. It carried that same wet distortion, like his mouth was full of water. "Dad, you're dead," she whispered. "Then who's talking to you?" Her knees almost gave out. She pressed the key into the lock. It turned on its own. The bolt snapped. The door trembled once, then burst inward with a rush of freezing air. The light died. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then came the sound of chains unraveling somewhere deep below. Claire stepped forward into the dark. The chamber stretched farther than she expected, curving downward into what looked like a dry dock. Rusty catwalks crisscrossed over a pit of black water. In the center stood an iron cylinder the size of a small boat, its surface etched with the same runes carved upstairs, and inside that cylinder, movement. A shape pressed against the glass window. A hand. She climbed down the nearest ladder, each step echoing like thunder. The closer she got, the colder the air became, until her breath turned white again. The glass was fogged, but she could make out a pale face inside. Eyes open, mouth moving. It was her father. The shock hit her like a wave. He wasn't decomposed. He wasn't bones. He was floating, suspended in some kind of liquid that shimmered blue in the flicker of her dying flashlight. She slammed a hand against the glass. "Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes rolled toward her, slow and unnatural. His lips moved again, no sound, just bubbles. Then from the speakers bolted into the walls, his voice came through. The same distortion, the same drowning tone. "You shouldn't have opened it." The water beneath her feet began to churn. The runes on the tank glowed brighter. Something else was inside with him, something shifting, coiled around his body. Claire stumbled back. The hum rose to a roar, and a single crack appeared across the glass. Her father's hand slapped against it, leaving a smear of blue light. His mouth opened wide in a silent scream. The crack spread. The glass shattered. A wall of black water exploded outward, knocking her off her feet. The floodlights flickered, died, then reignited in deep crimson. Through the torrent, a shape crawled from the broken tank, long, twisting, human, and not. Her father's face flickered between features, half his, half the widow's. We kept the light to hold her back. "Now you've freed her," Claire gasped, dragging herself onto the catwalk, water pouring down the stairs behind her. The figure turned its head, eyes empty sockets filled with glowing sea blue light. It whispered in two voices at once, her father's and the widow's overlapping. "The sea remembers." The roar of the sea swallowed everything. It surged through the cracks in the walls, crashing into the chamber like a living thing, wild, hungry, and furious. Claire gripped the edge of the catwalk as the flood rose around her knees. The figure, her father, or whatever he had become, waded forward through the broken tank's debris. His movements were jerky, fragmented, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. His skin flickered between life and decay, blue veins glowing under translucent flesh. And behind him, the widow's shadow spread across the water, tall, skeletal, and crowned with drifting strands of black hair that moved like seaweed in slow motion. "Claire," both voices whispered in sync. "You have her blood." Her flashlight was gone. Only the emergency red glow lit the space, painting everything in pulsating crimson. Pipes burst one after another, spraying boiling steam into the air. Metal screamed. The chamber was collapsing. Claire stumbled toward the ladder, every rung slick with seawater. The voice followed her. "He gave me his light, and I gave him my breath. You came back for him, so I can have you too." She reached the top, slammed the hatch shut, and turned the wheel lock with both hands. Her body trembled. She could still hear the sloshing from below, the wet scraping of something dragging itself up the metal. A pause. Then, bang! The hatch jumped an inch off the floor. She screamed and threw her weight over it, holding it down as the pounding grew harder. Each strike sounded like bones breaking. Finally, it stopped. The silence was worse. Claire staggered back, chest heaving. The lighthouse above was shaking, windows rattling, the lantern at the top flickering violently. The radio in the corner sparked to life. A distorted male voice came through, full of static. "Lightkeeper, report. The sea is..." Then it cut to a shriek, like feedback, and went dead. Claire grabbed her soaked jacket and the small oil lamp her father always kept on the stairs. She lit it with trembling hands, the wick hissing weakly. The moment the flame caught, the house breathed again. Every wall seemed to expand and contract with the rhythm of the sea. Paint bubbled, floorboards swelled. She backed toward the main hall. The portraits on the walls were weeping saltwater, the faces within them shifting, eyes turning to follow her. "Stop," she said. "You're not real. Real enough to drown you." The voice came from the lamp. The flame twisted, blue at the core. Inside it for an instant, Claire saw the widow's face, upside down, her mouth stretching into an inhuman grin. Claire threw the lamp. It shattered, fire spilling across the floor. The blue flame spread like spilled ink, racing toward the stairwell. She bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob spun freely, like it wasn't connected to anything. The walls warped again, swelling with every crash of waves outside. The sound of rushing water was coming from inside the walls now, echoing through the pipes, the radiators, even the air vents. A whisper floated through the hall. "You freed me. Now keep the light." The windows exploded inward, showering her with glass and cold rain. Beyond the shattered frame, the sea had risen to the edge of the cliff. Too high. Impossibly high, licking at the base of the lighthouse like a serpent tasting its prey. And in that impossible ocean, faces floated. Hundreds of them. Men, women, sailors, all staring upward with eyes glowing the same blue as the widow's. They weren't dead. They were waiting. Claire turned and ran up the spiral staircase toward the lantern room. Water chased her, spiraling up the steps in a churning whirlpool. She reached the top, gasping, soaked, and slammed the iron door shut behind her. The giant Fresnel lens loomed over her, a massive glass jewel that once cast its beam for miles. It was still burning, flickering weakly, but burning, and at its base lay her father's old journal, soaked but intact. She flipped it open, pages sticking to her fingers. Most of it was unreadable, ink smeared, words drowned in salt. But one line stood clear, written in heavy black pencil. If she escapes, burn the light. Only fire can unmake the sea. She looked up at the lantern, its mechanism humming faintly. Could it burn hot enough to stop what was coming? Below her, the walls thundered. The widow was climbing. Claire grabbed the fuel valve and wrenched it open. The lantern flared brighter, glass panes glowing orange-red. The entire tower trembled, the sea outside roaring like a wounded beast. The first hand appeared on the hatch, pale, elongated fingers dripping black water. Claire backed to the far side, holding the broken journal like a weapon. "You took everything from him," she said. "You won't take me. You already gave yourself to me when you opened the door." The widow's voice filled the room, coming from everywhere at once. The hatch blew off its hinges. Water surged in. The widow rose through it, half her father's shape, half her own true form, tendrils of hair flowing like smoke underwater. Claire stumbled, reached for the ignition lever beside the lens. She hesitated once, just once, and then pulled it down. The light ignited with a scream. Flame exploded outward, pure and white. The widow shrieked as her form burned away, the water around her boiling into steam. The glass shattered. The sea outside turned white. Everything went silent. When Claire opened her eyes, she was lying on the rocks below the lighthouse. Dawn had come. The tower above was blackened, smoke rising from its peak. Her father's key lay in her hand, rusted through. The tide had gone out completely. For a long time she just lay there, watching the sun climb out of the sea. No voices, no shadows, only the light. The sea was calm again, too calm. Claire stood on the rocks, the wind brushing her hair, the salt stinging the scratches on her skin. The blackened shell of the lighthouse towered behind her, its light extinguished for the first time in over a century. Smoke still curled from the windows, twisting into the pale orange dawn. She should have felt relief. She didn't. Her hands shook as she ran them over the old key, its surface pitted and corroded. Every time her thumb brushed its edge, she could almost hear it whisper. "Keep the light turning," her father's voice. She looked back at the tower. The lantern room was gone, blown apart by the explosion of light and fire. Only the skeleton of iron and glass remained, jutting out like a broken crown. The sea had pulled back overnight, leaving dark tide marks halfway up the cliffs. Everything smelled of burned oil and wet stone. Somewhere beneath that endless horizon, something was watching. She could feel it, patient, silent, waiting for the next Lightkeeper to forget the rules. The Coast Guard found her that afternoon, wandering barefoot through the dunes. She didn't resist when they called her name. She didn't speak when they asked what happened. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, eyes distant. The rescuers carried her into the truck, covering her with a blanket, whispering about the fire and the explosion that somehow didn't spread to the rest of the island. Claire stared out the back window as the lighthouse disappeared behind the mist. For a moment she swore she saw the lantern flicker. Just once, a spark, then nothing. They kept her overnight at a small hospital in Port Heron. The doctor said she was in shock. No serious injuries, just exhaustion and dehydration. But Claire knew better. She could still taste salt on her tongue, though she hadn't been near the sea since dawn. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she heard the faint click of the Fresnel lens turning. A nurse entered her room with a clipboard. "Miss Alden?" The Coast Guard said they found some of your father's things in the wreck. Should we bring them in? Claire hesitated. What things? The nurse smiled softly. Just a few old tools and a journal. When they handed it to her, her breath caught. The journal was half burned, the leather cover cracked and blackened. But when she opened it, the ink was untouched. The pages were dry, and the handwriting was new. Her father's. She flipped through, trembling. Every page was filled with entries dated after his death. She sleeps again. The sea remembers everything. Claire will keep the light. Her chest tightened. No, I didn't. But at the bottom of the last page, a line was written in a different hand. Hers. She hadn't written it. At least she didn't remember doing it. I am the keeper now. That night she couldn't sleep. Rain tapped against the hospital window, gentle at first, then harder. When she opened her eyes, the power was out. The room was bathed in the faint blue of emergency lights, and somewhere outside, far beyond the dunes, a single beam of white light swept across the sky. The lighthouse. Her heart stopped. No, she whispered. It's gone. It burned, but the beam turned again, slow, deliberate, cutting through the fog, reaching for the sea, and beneath it, the sound of the foghorn. Low, mournful, calling. She pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, she saw a figure standing in the light. Tall, thin, drenched, her father, or what was left of him. The next morning, the doctors said she was gone. Her bed empty, window open, footprints leading into the rain. They searched the cliffs for 3 days. Nothing. But on the 4th night, the beam of the lighthouse turned again. Not the bright, golden light it once cast. This one burned cold, blue, shimmering like the bottom of the ocean. Fishermen said they saw a woman standing in the lantern room, her hair whipping in the wind, her silhouette framed by that impossible glow. Sometimes she waved to passing boats. Sometimes she just stared, and if you listened closely through the wind and the surf, you could hear her whisper, "Keep the light turning." Epilogue years later. The lighthouse remains closed to the public. The structure is condemned, the cliffs unstable, the area fenced off, but locals still tell the story. The one about the light that burns without power, about the sea that never sleeps, about the woman who walks the lantern room every night at 3:17 a.m. when the tide is lowest. Tourists who wander too close say the light doesn't just shine, it watches. And sometimes when the sea is loud, they swear they hear a voice beneath the waves, a woman's voice. If she escapes, burn the light, then silence, and the slow, endless pulse of the sea.